Imagine the quiet hours before night gives way to sleep, when the world's harsh edges soften and even the bravest among us let down their guard. Tonight, in the hush of your own space, you are not alone. Tonight, the story is for you, or for someone like you, perhaps, whose pain hid beneath laughter, whose illness wore an invisible face. Recently, the world heard a confession, a voice familiar to millions. A song, a smile, revealed something most of us never see. Justin Timberlake, like countless others, has suffered with Lyme disease. There was no warning, no clear explanation, and for the longest time, no understanding. Lyme is stubborn and secretive, hard to spot, harder still to prove. For many, it is an illness that science knows, but society still doubts. But as we close our eyes tonight, we invite you to step softly down a winding corridor of time, a hallway lined with fading portraits of suffering, misunderstanding, and silent burdens people have always carried. What Justin feels is neither uncommon nor truly new. Humanity has walked with mysterious plagues for thousands of years, sickness that crept in unrecognized, fevers that erased themselves from memory as quickly as they swept through villages. There are stories, almost forgotten, of illnesses so baffling, so fleeting, that even the wisest healers and bravest rulers could only name them with trembling. Voices, the sweating sickness which haunted the royal courts of England, a city overcome by a plague that made its people dance to death, a mysterious fever that toppled Athens when it was greatest. Even in modern times, the Russian flu drifted through the world, leaving behind riddles with no solution, and now there is Lyme. But Lyme is only today's shadow. Its kin were here long before, wearing different names, breaking different hearts. Across eras, what cannot be classified is often ignored. What cannot be explained is often forgotten. Tonight, we remember, not only for Justin, not only for those who live with invisible illness, but for every ancestor whose pain was quietly erased by time, by listening, by wondering, by drifting off into the safe folds of history. You are part of a gentle act of remembrance. Perhaps, as you settle in, you will find surprising comfort in the knowledge that you are never truly alone. Your story threads back through centuries now. If you're ready, let's draw the curtain aside and step into the first chapter of these forgotten plagues, the strange, shimmering stories of illness that threatened to unmake worlds before disappearing, often just as silently as they came. Imagine England during the reign of Henry VIII, the air thick, perfumed with rain and the smoke from countless hearths. The city is restless, streets winding through markets, court intrigue humming behind every doorway. And then a new presence settles, silent at first, invisible, but unmistakably real. It begins without warning, a fever, first gentle, then swift, a prickling in the skin, soon replaced by violent shivers. Men and women, strong and healthy by all measures, are struck down within hours. Their bodies are gripped by deep, endless sweating, as if the illness is wringing them dry from the inside out. The sweat is relentless, pouring from every pore, drenching clothing and bedding alike. Hearts pound with terror. Once the sweating starts, hope dwindles. No one knows the cause. No one expects the cure. Even royalty falls prey. Entire noble households vanish in the span of a day. Physicians arrive, their faces drawn, whispering remedies born of desperation. Cool draughts, herbal poultices, prayers to saints no longer known. Some say it's a punishment, some a foreign curse, others merely shrugged, and point to the tides or the restless skies. This disease makes no demands of wealth or poverty. It claims without prejudice. The greatest among Henry's courtiers, like Duke of Suffolk or Anne Boleyn's brother, found themselves as helpless as any crofter. Familiar lives end with fevered trembling in the middle of a bustling summer. The royal court, ever on the move, flees the disease like a hunted beast, traveling from palace to palace, hoping to outrun a whisper that has already outrun them. But then, just as mysteriously as it appeared, the sweating sickness fades away. The last great outbreak is whispered about in the 1550s. And then there is silence, the sort that echoes for generations. No medical textbook has ever found its certain cause. Theories drift between hantaviruses and relapsing fevers, but certainty is impossible. Yet, like a shadow in twilight, the memory returns whenever the world feels vulnerable once again. It reminds us how much we have yet to understand, and how fragile our stories truly are. If you're ready, we can drift forward and trace the footsteps of another, even stranger affliction, the dancing plague. Close your eyes and imagine the cobbled streets of Strasbourg. In the summer of 1518, the air is warm, thick with the scent of fresh bread and distant river water. The bells of the cathedral toll the hour, marking a steady rhythm. But in July, something wild upsets the ancient order. It begins almost quietly. A lone woman, Frau Trophia, starts to dance. At first, people glance, perhaps with mild amusement, at her determined, tireless shuffling. But she does not stop. Not after a song, not after an hour, not even after the sun has set and risen again. Her feet seem to move of their own accord, her body compelled by something both within and beyond herself. Within days, dozens join her, then hundreds. Men, women, even children, swept up in an inexplicable need to keep moving. Their faces are drawn and weary, but their bodies refuse the comfort of rest. Some collapse, only to stand again and continue. There are no musicians, no festival, no celebration, only a growing sense of unease as the city watches relatives and neighbors spiral helplessly through endless days and nights. The city council, bewildered, attempts to find reason in ritual. Physicians decree that the dancers are afflicted with hot blood. The solution: more dancing. Musicians are hired. A stage is built in the center square. Perhaps the council thinks the sickness can be exhausted out of its victims, but the dancing persists. Weeks pass, people fall, some recover, others do not rise again. Exhaustion, dehydration, and heartbreak settle over Strasbourg like a velvet shroud. Was this a contagious illness, a mind trick, or the product of rye fungus? The hallucinogenic ergot said to haunt European grain stores. No single answer remains. Those who witnessed the events would remember them in hushed voices for the rest of their lives. The memory clung to families and folklore, a warning about the thin boundary between the rational and the unexplainable in time. The dancers faded away, their fever vanishing like mist at sunrise. The city eventually returned to its ancient rhythms, but the question remained: where do our ailments truly begin? In the body, in the mind, or in the world beyond both? Let your imagination dance in the gentle twilight. If you wish, we may now follow this thread of mystery across the sea to ancient Athens and a plague that changed the fate of a civilization. The year is 430 BCE. Imagine yourself at the height of Athens' glory. Marble columns glitter in the white sun. Crowded markets thrum with the sounds of philosophy and commerce. The city is tightly packed, sheltered behind its famed long walls. standing proudly against powerful rivals as war rages outside. It is a time of ambition, intellect, and hope, a golden age poised between light and shadow. Then, quietly at first, something begins to stir within the throng. An illness, unfamiliar and unyielding, filters through the city gates, perhaps borne by trade ships riding the waters from distant lands. At first, there are fevers, headaches, swollen throats. Then, more, persistent coughing, unquenchable thirst, eyes inflamed and reddened, rashes blossoming like dark roses across the skin. The historian Thucydides, himself a survivor, would describe the city's descent with clarity and distance. Doctors are powerless. The usual remedies falter. The sick and the healthy live side by side, separated only by growing dread. The plague spreads fast. Friend to friend, family to family, even the great Pericles would not escape its touch. The city's sacred fires, tended since ancient times, are extinguished from neglect. There is panic, but also an exhausting grief. Rites and customs dissolve, funerals held in haste or not at all, hope subsiding beneath the weight of relentless suffering. Some Athenians, resigned, cling to each other. Others turn away. As many as 1/4 of the city is lost. The golden age, so carefully wrought, is shadowed by memory and mourning. No answer would ever arrive for the Athenians. Some later suggested typhus, smallpox, or even Ebola, yet none quite fit the tapestry of symptoms. No single sign was left in bone or record that could tell us, certainly, what caused the city's unraveling. The plague faded, but it would haunt the Athenians as long as their culture drew breath, whispered about in quiet moments, marked in the stones as a warning about the limits of pride and the unpredictable power of the unseen. Perhaps, as you drift beneath the safe cover of your own walls tonight, you might sense the shared longing of those who once watched fires, gutter, and dreams turn to memory. And still, humanity pressed onward. Shall we proceed to a more recent riddle, woven into the very roots of the modern world, the Russian flu of 1889? The end of the 19th century. Imagine train whistles echoing across frozen steppe and crowded cities bathed in gaslight. This is a world on the cusp of modernity. Europe and Asia newly connected by iron rails and steamships, telegram wires, crackling with news that races faster than ever before. In this swiftly shrinking world, a new kind of shadow stretches its reach. It begins quietly, as so many mysteries do, in the city of Bukhara, now part of modern Uzbekistan. Rumors ripple east and west, carried by travelers and merchants. Soon, the illness makes its way to Moscow, and then, unforgettably, to St. Petersburg. From there, it leaps with uncanny speed, a sickness that follows the Iron Road, tracing the arteries of commerce towards Europe and beyond. Symptoms begin with a familiar whisper: headache, fever, chills. Yet the Russian flu, as it comes to be known, leaves a deeper, more lingering mark. There is an unsteadiness, a curious fatigue that continues for weeks. For some, the world blurs. Memory and energy fade, giving way to a new sensation of persistent tiredness, sound familiar in a faint, uncanny way. Some modern scholars believe this pandemic may have been humanity's first encounter with a coronavirus, a distant echo of what would sweep the globe more than a century later. For those living, then, it was simply mysterious. Old explanations fell short. Was it miasma, the air itself poisoned by decay? Was it divine displeasure, retribution for a world growing too fast, too loud. More than 1 million people perished worldwide, their lives sketched only dimly in the records of overwhelmed parish clerks and exhausted nurses. And yet, there was a resilience too. Communities mourned, then gathered. Recipes for ginger infusions and tonics passed from hand to hand, old home remedies mingling with new, uncertain science. This flu, unlike the plagues before it, left behind more than just legend. It left data, the beginnings of what would become the study of pandemics. Still, like the illnesses before it, the Russian flu's true origins and long-term effects remain debated. A shadow that slips easily through the fences of certainty. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the world remained changed, not just by trains and telegraphs, but by the shared awareness that even the new world was not immune to the old fears. With your mind at ease and your curiosity gently stirred, shall we explore what ties these lost plagues to the illnesses many struggle with today? If you wish, we'll journey next to the realm of the invisible enemy, modern mystery diseases, with Lyme disease at their elusive core. Beneath the quiet surface of our sleeping histories, a pattern emerges, a rhythm both ancient and familiar. Each generation has its specters, illnesses that move invisibly, carrying symptoms beyond simple explanation and consequences beyond easy cure. Tonight, as you reflect on the stories of lost plagues, notice how the shape of these mysteries repeats itself through the centuries. The English sweating sickness, the plague of Athens, the dancing fevers, they all arrived swiftly, cast societies into confusion, and left with as little explanation as they came. Even the Russian flu, documented with the tools of a new age, left questions that have yet to find clear answers. At the heart of all these stories is not just the mystery of disease, but the experience of not being believed. Imagine the heartache. Doctors unable to recognize what they see. Neighbors wary of invisible terrors. The sick themselves doubting the reality of their own suffering. Some are accused of exaggeration or of moral failing, or are left to endure. In silence, their voices dimming into the ether of family folklore. Yet, this pattern persists into the modern age. Illnesses like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and especially Lyme disease follow the same winding path. Recognized by some, dismissed by others, shrouded in controversy and uncertainty. One body may recover quickly, another may ache. For months, years, or a lifetime. The rhythm of their lives, the repeated search for clarity or comfort, is a quiet, constant struggle. They navigate between medical science and alternative healing, between skepticism and solidarity, between feeling isolated and hoping for understanding. Through it all, the echo of those who came before, those lost to forgotten plagues, reminds us how long and lonely this road can be, and how essential it is that no story, however strange, be left behind in your own life. Perhaps you have known an unseen ache, or cared for someone who moves through the world uncertain and weary. Perhaps, like so many before, you have borne the weight of an invisible burden. This is not new. It is a thread that ties us all across centuries. As you gently dwell on this, let us move forward, turning to those whose names stand quietly behind. The histories, the patients and physicians whose lives were shaped by their encounters with mystery. Their stories, too, deserve remembrance. If you listen closely to the spaces between great events, you may hear the faintest echoes of ordinary lives. Men, women, and children whose days were quietly transformed by illness. These are the stories rarely written in official records, but carried in letters, diaries, lullabies, and the smallest corners of memory. Imagine, long ago, a Tudor servant girl, her hands raw from work, suddenly struck down by the sweating sickness. Her family would watch and wait, powerless in the candlelit dark. Whispering prayers and stories, she taught the younger children. Her passing would be marked not by physician's notes, but by a favorite scarf left hanging, and the absence of her gentle laughter at evening meals. Or think of a craftsman's wife in Strasbourg, eyes wide with fear as her neighbors collapsed into exhausted movement on the cobbles outside her door, a music none could silence, drawing husbands, wives, and even children into an endless dance. What hopes did she set aside? What comfort did she'll find in ritual or prayer as the world around her shifted into bizarre new rhythms? Picture, too, the sons and daughters of Athens huddling at night, clinging together as illness swept through the city with invisible hands. Small treasures, the pressed olive leaf, the painted shell, might become talismans of protection, each new sunrise measured not by what was gained, but by what or who was left, or close to our own time. A mother in 1889 London, tucking her child into bed, hoping sleep would keep the fever at bay. She waits through the long, creaking silence of Victorian night for the sound of steady breathing. A sign of hope, her heartbeats counting time as medicine can only wait and hope, and in every story, a longing to be seen, to be believed, to not be forgotten when health returns to the many and only memories remain for the few. These private, precious histories rarely appear in the chronicles of war or the treaties of kings, but they are the true heart of history's plagues. In honoring them now, even as you drift towards sleep, you are giving space for the voices the world forgot. Their courage and fear, their small daily resistances to an overwhelming unknown, are the truest testament to what it means to live through mystery. And so, as we continue, let us remember not just the nameless, but the nearly remembered, the doctors and healers who struggled, like their patients, to answer questions with few answers. In every era, as mysterious illnesses swept through villages and cities, there were those who faced them head-on, not with certainty, but with curiosity and resolve laced with humility. The healers, a word encompassing apothecaries and monks, midwives and curious old women, physicians in stiff collars, and herbalists with earth beneath their nails. Picture a Tudor doctor, hurriedly summoned by an anxious family as the sweating sickness strikes. He arrives with little more than a cloth bag, its contents a patchwork of hope and hazard, dried roots, bitters, handwritten charms. For each remedy, there are 12 doubts. He bows his head and offers comfort, but his voice wavers. Sometimes, his presence alone brings peace, a brief sense that something can be done, even when nothing truly can. In Strasbourg, physicians, many learned but often baffled, watch helplessly as scores of citizens dance themselves to exhaustion. They consult old texts and argue in council chambers, their conclusions vacillating between bodily imbalance and devilish temptation. Some light incense, some prescribe music in hopes of harmonizing the spirit, some merely recommend fasting and prayer. In ancient Athens, temple healers offer oils and poultices, laying hands upon fevered brows under statues of Asclepius, the god of healing. Rites are performed, sacrifices made, but for all the wealth of ritual, the answers are fleeting. The priest, the healer, even those steeped in new philosophies, must finally admit that the nature of the plague still eludes them. By the 19th century, medicine begins to shift. Stethoscopes and thermometers join herbal teas and folk remedies. In crowded tenements of St. Petersburg or London during the Russian flu, doctors and nurses move tirelessly from bed to bed, recording symptoms, urging rest, experimenting with every mixture the apothecary can provide. And always, the healers face the same dilemma: to be a source of comfort when cures are out of reach, to admit uncertainty when the world wants certainty most. Their diaries and letters often betray a kind of gentle despair, a wish that skill alone could rescue those in their care. For every doctor whose name we remember, there are countless whose love and labor made only the quietest of ripples, their memory preserved in the stories of grateful families or the silence of empty chairs as you rest. Think of those who have watched over loved ones through sleepless nights, parents, partners, and professionals who, faced with the unknown, offer what they can: presence, ritual, a steady hand. And then, with renewed gentleness, let us look outward once more to the wider consequences of each forgotten plague. History often remembers plagues as private tragedies, but each mystery illness casts a far larger shadow, reshaping life at every level, from village rituals to world events. As you picture the places we visited tonight, notice how the rhythm of their lives changed, not just for the sick, but for everyone during the sweating sickness. The entire machinery of the Tudor court became nomadic, noble families uprooted, and ordinary life suspended. Markets faltered, travel became perilous, and the cycle of work and celebration broke down. Fear took root not only in the bedroom of the patient, but in the banquets and back alleys of London. The countryside itself seemed to hold its breath. In Strasbourg, as townsfolk were gripped by the dancing plague, the marketplace became a space of uncertainty. Merchants hesitated, trade slowed, and the city's leaders struggled to maintain authority. Community rituals, parades, masses, weddings were postponed or abandoned. Strangers arriving from the countryside brought not a promise of commerce, but the risk of contagion and the spreading of wild, unsettling rumors. In Athens, the plague led to a break in custom so profound it unsettled the very foundation of society. Funeral rituals, once the cornerstone of communal identity, gave way to hurried burials. The care of the sick fell often to the already ill, eroding social order and leaving people isolated in grief. In the wake of the disease, confidence in leadership faltered. The city struggled to reclaim its civic pride, and ancient laws were quietly reshaped by necessity. With the Russian flu, nations saw the first global echoes of what we now call a pandemic. Postal routes and railway stations became sites of anxious vigilance. Governments attempted quarantines, but processes were inconsistent and trust in authority wavered. News of the mysterious illness, carried by telegraph and newspaper, met with popular skepticism, gossip, or even denial. The lingering exhaustion left once productive workers unable to keep pace. Labor shortages shifting the gears of industry and trade, beyond statistics and headlines. These shadows found their way into daily habits, meals, greetings, and even dreams. Families learned to avoid certain places, to keep children closer, to rely more on neighbors, or, sometimes, to trust less. Folk customs and superstitions blossomed anew as people sought control over what could not be easily seen. Even now, the echoes of these long-past events shape the ways we respond to uncertainty. The memory of how society bends and recovers, or doesn't, quietly persists, teaching us that adaptation is as critical as any medicine. With this lens, we turn our attention to the aftermath. What happens to a people, a place, or a world when mystery illness recedes? The imprint of survival can be as subtle as a story whispered before bed. As each wave of strange illness gives way to quiet, there emerges a different kind of story, a chorus of survivors whose paths no longer fit the old patterns. The day-to-day world resumes, but it is never quite the same. The rhythm of their lives is slower, cautious, reshaped by memory and altered by what lingers unseen. For some survivors, recovery is complete, a simple return to the duties and pleasures of daily life. Others, however, find themselves carrying faint but persistent reminders. Fatigue that persists, joints that ache when the weather turns, haunting dreams, or a newfound anxiety when the air becomes heavy and damp. A Tudor merchant long past. The fever starts each day with caution that never fully fades. A once vigorous Athenian philosopher grows quiet, content in the shade. His boldness owed now to memory instead of certainty. These survivors become quiet witnesses. Rarely do they speak of what happened, yet their changed routines, altered ambitions, and quieter joys shape their families and communities. Children borrow their mother's cautiousness. Apprentices learn patience among their master's interruptions, and whole neighborhoods adapt to the rhythm of convalescence. Sometimes, silent suffering shapes not just bodies, but entire cultures. New customs arise to shield the vulnerable, extra garlic at meals, springtime house cleanings, the careful avoidance of strangers for a season. Folk beliefs grow around visible and invisible scars. A blue ribbon at the window, a prayer muttered under one's breath, a holiday invented to mark the return of health. And yet, the world at large can be quick to forget. As soon as markets reopen, as soon as leaders proclaim an end, the loudest stories shift to triumph or renewal. Only in hidden moments, between mothers and sons, in bedtime tales, or in the soft sighs of lovers, does the true aftermath live on. Quiet survivors carry the weight of both loss and resilience. Their endurance, if not their names, becomes a silent heirloom passed down through the ages. Rest tonight, knowing that, even in times of uncertainty, healing, slow, uncelebrated, imperfect, has always found a way to continue. Let us glance now towards the places and times where history itself tries to bury these memories, and examine why it is sometimes easier to forget than to remember. When the fever breaks and ordinary life creeps back, history often lays a gentle blanket of silence over events too unsettling, too inexplicable, or too emotionally exhausting to revisit. The urgent need to heal, to move on, to rebuild, makes forgetting a comfort, a balm that soothes even as it erases. Consider how many of the lost plagues you've heard tonight exist mostly as echoes. The English sweating sickness and the dancing plague are footnotes rather than chapters. The plague of Athens survives only through Thucydides, whose sober words were as much a warning as a recollection. The Russian flu lies in the background of family trees, unseen but perhaps responsible for generational shifts and lifelong ailments. There is a quiet process to this forgetting. Those who led through the crisis retire or pass away, their stories drifting out of living memory. The young, eager for stability, avoid old tales. At the level of the individual, remembering might provoke anxiety or reawaken grief, prompting a gentle rewriting of personal history, a transformation from the time we lost so many to simply a difficult winter. Official records often fail to capture lived experience. Medical notes, concerned primarily with patterns and numbers, are silent about the inner realities of patients and survivors. Over time, ambiguous symptoms and misty causes slip beyond the grasp of modern diagnosis. What cannot be classified is shelved and later misfiled or dismissed. Cultural narratives and national pride may also play a part. Admitting to being undone by an unseen, unexplainable force is difficult. The urge to tell stories of triumph, resilience, and recovery is strong. And so tales of mystery illness are gently pushed to the margins in favor of clearer, more heroic epics. Even so, history's buried stories remain. In lullabies, in old remedies, in the recurring urge to protect and prepare, we sense the shadowy inheritance of long ago suffering. It is a memory without specifics, a constancy born out of the need to survive rather than to dwell on pain. Yet, as you settle further into sleep, consider this. Each time we remember, each time we gently speak or listen to these almost forgotten stories, we loosen the grip of silence, making room for greater empathy and deeper understanding. The world is less lonely for it. Now, let us draw a deep, gentle breath and move into the world of modern mystery illness. Here, the echoes of the past meet the uncertainties of the present in the story of Lyme disease and the struggle to be seen. As the world hushes into 21st century dusk, the rhythm of our lives is different yet strangely familiar. The cities pulse with electric light. Internet connections carry news faster than steam or telegraph ever dreamed, and yet the feeling of being pursued by an invisible enemy remains. Tonight, we turn to Lyme disease, a story both contemporary and timeless, echoing the forgotten plagues, but woven into the fabric of modern confusion and hope. Let us begin by gently uncovering what Lyme disease is and how it inhabits that borderland between certainty and the unknown. Imagine the quiet edges of a New England forest, the undergrowth soft with dew, air humming with insects as the sun filters through maple and oak. Here, the very heart of American serenity, invisible dangers linger among the grass and fallen leaves. The tiny deer tick waits, patient and unhurried. Lyme disease begins with a bite so small, most never feel it. The tick, barely the size of a poppy seed, attaches to skin, feeding unnoticed. In the process, it may transmit a spiral-shaped bacterium, Borrelia burgdorferi. At first, there may be nothing but a subtle itch, a fleeting red patch. Later, the skin may bloom into a rash, famed for its bull's eye pattern, but often vague or absent. Some notice only mild aches and fever, easily mistaken for a summer cold. Others, sometimes weeks or months later, develop fatigue, muscle and joint pain, headaches, or a fogginess that clouds memory and sleep. For a few, the journey is swift, a brief illness, a course of antibiotics, and an uneventful recovery. For others, the story stretches. Pain lingers, clarity dims, a sense of vitality quietly steals away. This is where Lyme disease slips from medical textbook to mystery, leaving patients stranded between worlds. The rhythm of life for those affected by Lyme becomes measured by symptoms rather than seasons. Days are shaped by energy rationing and gentle perseverance. Ordinary pleasures, a walk in the park, an evening with friends, become measured and rare. Doctors, informed by medical training but restricted by incomplete science, may struggle to recognize the full scope of Lyme's effects. And so begins a recurring refrain. Patients doubted, their experiences discounted. The invisible made more invisible by skepticism. Yet, woven through this challenge, there remains something quietly hopeful. Each person who endures, every researcher who persists, carries the inheritance of countless generations who have learned to live with the unknown. Here, the age-old dance between patient and healer continues, quietly, bravely, and together. Visualize, if you will, a woodland at dawn. Mist clings to meadows, birds call softly, and beneath the green canopy, the life of the forest quietly turns. Here, on the underside of a grass blade or the rough bark of a tree, rests an animal almost too small to see, a nymph-stage black-legged tick, one of nature's most patient hunters. Ticks are born opportunists. They sense the warmth and carbon dioxide of passing animals. Mice, deer, birds, and, occasionally, humans. The tick's quest is methodical. It creeps onto a host, finds a quiet patch of skin, and begins to feed. Unaware of the drama it will set in motion, hidden within the tick's saliva is a complex cocktail, the tick's own way to numb, clot, and cloak. This is also where Bergdorferi begins its uncertain journey, transferred drop by drop into the human bloodstream. Borrelia is a sprochet, a bacterium shaped like a corkscrew, coiled and twisting. Its unusual form allows it to slip between cells and tissues, evading detection by the body's immune system. At first, the invasion is silent. Weeks may pass before any sign appears. The rare, telltale bullseye rash might slowly expand, but often it is faint or simply never noticed at all. As the bacterium migrates through tissues, it brings subtle disruptions that ripple through the body. Fatigue, aching joints, forgotten names and faces. The immune system, desperate to catch up, may flare up in patches, leading to symptoms that wax and wane, persist and fade. Not every tick bite leads to Lyme disease, and not all ticks carry the bacteria. The interplay between wildlife, weather, and human life shapes each risk. But for those who do become ill, the story can be as layered and complex as any ancient fable in the margins of daily life. These quiet bites, and the bacteria they deliver, have become part of modern folklore. Hikers, trade warnings, parents check children's hair after a day outdoors. Gardeners don long sleeves and socks as a kind of gentle armor. Each small, unseen risk echoes the ancient human dance with invisible enemies now. As we leave the forest's edge, we encounter another mystery. Why is Lyme sometimes so hard to recognize and treat? Let us turn calmly to the intricacies of diagnosis and the ways the unknown lingers in the gaps of science. Imagine sitting in a softly lit examination room, the paper crinkling beneath you, the distant murmur of the clinic, a doctor's face, earnest but uncertain. You recount a series of symptoms: fatigue that won't lift, aching joints, headaches, lapses in memory. Perhaps you recall a rash, or perhaps not. Maybe a single summer evening months ago in the woods. The story is already fragmenting as you tell it. The challenge of diagnosing Lyme disease lies in its silence and its imitation. Early on, its symptoms mirror those of many common problems. A fever mistaken for flu, a sore joint like that of simple overwork, foggy thinking dismissed as stress. The telltale rash does not always appear, or fades before a doctor can witness it. Blood tests, meant to be a compass in the fog, are imperfect early on, too insensitive, missing the infection. Later, sometimes showing false positives, suggesting an answer where there is none. Physicians, trained to seek clear signs, may find Lyme disease frustrating. For every straightforward case, rash, joint swelling, positive test, there are dozens that dwell in ambiguity. Chronic symptoms, lingering long after initial treatment, or appearing without easy evidence, push patient and doctor alike into the realm of medical mystery. Some, particularly in areas where Lyme is rare, are told their symptoms are psychosomatic or merely coincidental. Others receive a carousel of alternative diagnoses: chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, depression, anxiety. Each one shares a border with Lyme. Each one leaves the patient adrift. This uncertainty fractures more than medical charts. It strains relationships and trust. Patients may be doubted by family, communities, or even themselves. Doctors, sometimes well-meaning and sometimes wary, can only offer their best guesses. And so, a quiet tension fills the room. The invisible becomes even more invisible, simply because our tools for seeing remain incomplete. Yet this shadowy space is not empty. It is where innovation, advocacy, and perseverance quietly work. Every unsolved case, every unheard patient, becomes a gentle nudge toward broader understanding and care. Let us now look at those whose pain went unrecognized the longest. People living with so-called chronic Lyme and the ongoing debate that shadows their journey. Imagine moving through the world in a body you no longer entirely recognize. Aches receding one day, flaring the next, energy draining easily and unpredictably. You have done what was asked, endured early symptoms, received the recommended antibiotics, and yet, months or years later, you are still unwell. For tens of thousands, this is the quiet landscape of what is called chronic Lyme disease. Here, the diagnosis is not so much a scientific term as a campsite on the border of medicine. Some call it post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. Others refer to a broader category of chronic, tick-borne mystery. Whatever the name, the experience is real. Exhaustion, pain, cognitive haze, or even depression and anxiety that resist. Easy cure. The medical profession, confronted by patients who do not recover as expected, is divided. There are those who insist persistent symptoms must mean persistent infection, a case for longer, more aggressive antibiotic therapy. Others argue that lingering symptoms are the echo of an immune system truly wrung out, or the memory of trauma, imprinted on brain and body. There are debates over terminology, research priorities, and the very validity of patient suffering. Into this vacuum, uncertainty grows. Support groups, online forums, and alternative practitioners become lifelines for the ill, offering solidarity and care even as consensus remains elusive. Some find relief through unconventional treatments, herbal protocols, dietary changes, or therapies focused on stress and sleep. Others feel left out, doubted, or even blamed by those who do not understand the persistence of their struggle. Meanwhile, advocacy simmers. Lyme organizations push for new research, better diagnostics, and most of all, validation. The debate has rippled outward, touching policymakers, insurance companies, and households balancing hope with exhaustion. If you or a loved one have felt this tension, the double burden of illness and disbelief, know you are part of a long human story. The rhythm of not being believed, of enduring quietly in the absence of certainty, is as old as the plagues themselves. In recognizing this, we gently affirm the experience of suffering, even when its cause defies definition. Next, let us explore the illness's Lyme so often gets mistaken for a shadowy borderland where many are stranded. their stories quietly echoing in doctors' offices and living rooms alike. Picture a muddled tapestry, threads crossing and recrossing, impossible to unravel easily. For many who dwell in the land of mysterious chronic symptoms, this is the fabric of lived reality. Pain, fatigue, foggy memory, that gentle throb of uncertainty. These define not just Lyme disease, but a family of contested modern illnesses. Take fibromyalgia, often diagnosed when widespread pain persists without obvious cause. Here too are aching joints, sensitive muscles, the weight of tiredness that sleep never completely relieves. Diagnosis is often a process of exclusion, a slow unwinding of other possibilities. Once misrecognized as nothing more than hysteria, it is now accepted, yet not fully understood. Accepted as much for its persistence as its clarity. Or consider chronic fatigue syndrome, spoken of in quiet conversations among those who find even daily tasks overwhelming. There are mornings when the body feels pressed down, stamina drained by unknown hands. The syndrome was once ridiculed. Yuppie flu, some called it, dismissing the depth of unseen struggle with a phrase rooted in misunderstanding. But for sufferers, the rhythm of their lives is unavoidably shaped by invisible limits. Their social worlds and ambitions gently circumscribed by daily capacity. Lyme, with its kaleidoscope of symptoms, often weaves itself into these other stories. Some are first told they have chronic fatigue, only to discover Lyme after years of searching. Others are labeled with fibromyalgia while quietly suspecting something else. Misdiagnosis, born of the limitations of current science, means the stories of these illnesses echo, their sufferers moving in a shadow world not merely of fatigue and pain, but of doubt and delayed answers. And yet, the lines between these conditions remain blurry, their boundaries shaped by evolving science, shifting language, cultural trends, and patient advocacy. Each diagnosis is a comfort, but also a question, an answer that soothes, but never fully satisfies. Just as in centuries past, patients today move between specialists, try dietary changes, rest in darkened rooms, or seek solace in support groups. Communities bound not by certainty, but by shared experience. The rhythm of their lives is not that of cure, but that of careful adaptation. In gently recognizing these kindred conditions, we acknowledge a larger story, one where suffering, regardless of its name, deserves care and understanding. Now, let us turn to the world of conspiracy and suspicion, where shadows deepen and stories of origin spark both wonder and concern. Beneath the ordinary narrative of disease, there runs a current of deeper suspicion. For many touched by Lyme's elusive pain and denied full recognition by medicine, the story does not end at the laboratory, but expands to include whispers and what-ifs. Imagine, if you will, the shores of Long Island Sound. There, an isolated facility, Plum Island Animal Disease Center, rises on a spit of land, distant from towns but close enough that its silhouette is sometimes visible to beach and local fishermen. Created in the 1950s to research animal illnesses, it sits just a stone's throw from Old Lyme, Connecticut, the very town that would lend the disease its name in the late 1970s. When Lyme first entered public awareness, the proximity of Plum Island kindled rumors. Could researchers working with ticks, pathogens, and livestock diseases have accidentally unleashed something new? Accounts circulated of secret military objectives, Cold War experiments, and bioweapon mishaps behind the fences, feeding the imagination of journalists, residents, and eventually the wider world. These stories were further energized by the government's own history of secrecy, the real and well-documented use of Plum Island for biocontainment, foreign animal disease research, and the occasional classified project. Books and documentaries soon speculated. Did the bacterium responsible for Lyme escape through a moment's inattention, an ill wind, or by hitching a ride on wild birds? Medical historians and prudent scientists tend to doubt such claims, pointing, instead, to Borrelia's long evolutionary roots. Tick-borne Borrelia strains have likely haunted wildlife for millennia, quietly passing from deer to mouse to bird. Yet, the story persists, reshaped with each retelling. A comfort to some and a suspicion to others, for those whose lives are appended by invisible symptoms and disbelief. The Plum Island theory, however unlikely, offers both a scapegoat and an explanation for the world's neglect. It becomes, like folklore before it, a way to channel frustration, a narrative for the pain that medicine refuses to own. In this sense, conspiracy is not simply error or fantasy. It is also evidence of yearning, a deep longing for answers when the official story falls short. Let us gently leave these shadowy shores and return to the realm of medical science, to the fierce and sometimes contentious debates within the official institutions that shape our lives. Imagine the controlled quiet of a conference room in a medical institution, the hum of projectors, the shuffle of professional voices, thick binders open to slides and charts. Here, the debate over Lyme disease, especially its chronic forms, becomes both formal and intensely personal. At the center are two groups: the Infectious Diseases Society of America, IDSA, and the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, ILADS. Each has its own guidelines, research, and philosophies, visions of care shaped by evidence, but also by experience and underlying beliefs. The IDSA urges caution. Their stance: Lyme is usually curable with a standard course of antibiotics, and persistent symptoms may be the legacy of damage rather than ongoing infection. Extended antibiotic treatments, they argue, pose risks and may not help. Their guidelines are precise, restrictive, and firmly grounded in what they see as the available data. ILADS, on the other hand, stands with patients whose symptoms persist. They believe Lyme can become a long-term infection, difficult to detect, possibly protected by biofilms or hidden forms. They advocate for more flexible treatment, longer antibiotic courses if necessary, and a greater willingness to listen to those who do not fit the textbook case. Between them stands the patient, sometimes disregarded, caught in policy disputes beyond their reach. Insurance companies often side with IDSA recommendations, sometimes denying care to those who seek more. Meanwhile, advocacy groups challenge these denials, arguing that to ignore patient voices is to repeat the errors of history. This is not a mere disagreement about facts, but about the fundamental value of patient experience versus controlled clinical study, about the meaning of risk versus hope. Even today, medical journals, legal proceedings, and physician licensing boards are drawn into the conflict. Researchers argue in journals and at conferences, but the echoes of their words shape exam rooms, pharmacies, and living rooms all over the world. The result is uncertainty woven into every step of the patient journey. Some are well served by official guidelines, their illness brief and treatable. Others, left outside the boundary of consensus, feel doubted and adrift. Yet even in this division, the shared goal endures: alleviate suffering, pursue truth, and adapt care as understanding steadily grows. As the rhythm of this debate hums in the background, let us turn to tools of progress, laboratories, microscopes, and the hope they inspire, to see how Lyme is tracked, measured, and sometimes missed by modern science. Envision a sterile laboratory on a tranquil morning, glass vials lined up under fluorescent light, technicians in quiet communion with machines more precise than the human eye. This is the realm where the tiny spiral of Borrelia is hunted, evidence sought so that certainty can replace doubt. But even here, the mystery endures. The standard tests for Lyme begin with what's called a tutored process. The first, an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, ELISA, searches for antibodies, the echo of the body's defense against invaders. If this first whisper is heard, a second stage follows, a Western blot, looking for specific fragments of signature, a fingerprint left behind after the body's battle. Yet, the pursuit is imperfect. Early in the illness, the immune system may not have mounted a strong enough response for detection. Even later, antibodies may linger long after the bacterium has vanished, or never appear robustly at all, especially in those who struggle with weakened immunity or whose infections have burrowed deep. False negatives and false positives quietly confound. Environmental factors, co-infections with other tick-borne diseases, Babesia, Anaplasma, Bartonella, complicate the results. Some laboratories offer specialty tests, their results debated both for sensitivity and for reliability. Patients sometimes repeat their journey through testing in hopes that, this time, the story on paper may match the experience in their bodies. Researchers, in their steady way, develop new tools. PCR testing to detect bacterial DNA, culture methods to grow the spiral-shaped invaders, even the faint hope of a test for chronic Lyme. Progress is real, but slow. Science, as ever, proceeds by increments, the path forward traced with caution, and for every advance comes a reminder. A negative test cannot erase the lived symptoms of those who suffer. A positive result is often only the beginning, not the end, of long journeys through uncertainty. In this landscape, it is easy, natural, even, for the human mind to seek pattern, meaning, even magic, as you nestle more comfortably into your own space. Let us step aside from the admin of science and peer in on the culture of care, survival, and quiet rebellion that patients and their allies cultivate in the face of ambiguity. Picture a gentle gathering of voices, an online forum, a quiet support group in a sunny library, a circle of chairs in a suburban church basement. Here, the struggle with Lyme disease takes on new forms. No longer just a matter of tests and protocols. Healing becomes a shared journey, a culture built from the lived experience of uncertainty. Within these patient-led spaces, frustration is shared, but so is hope. Stories exchanged, symptoms tallied, physicians recommended, treatments debated, form an oral tradition as rich as any folklore. Practical wisdom is woven together with deep empathy, which combinations of antibiotics helped. Are herbal protocols or dietary changes worth trying? Has anyone found relief through meditation, acupuncture, or simply gentle walks in nature? These communities often operate on the margins, sometimes skeptical of medical consensus, yet fiercely loyal to those in their midst. The act of being believed, of feeling seen in one's suffering, becomes as crucial to healing as any pill or prescription. For many, validation is the first medicine, the simple acknowledgement of pain, confusion, and exhaustion as real and worthy of kindness. Advocacy grows from these roots like ivy up old stone walls. Public campaigns, patient-driven research funding, media appearances, even quiet letters to elected officials, all speak to the longing for progress that feels personal, urgent, and long overdue. Patients and their allies urge institutions to listen, to count cases more carefully, to admit that the boundaries of knowledge remain imperfect. In this landscape, rituals of care abound. Spoon theory, a popular metaphor among those with chronic illness, helps friends and family understand the careful budgeting of energy and effort. Journals, symptom calendars, and bedtime routines become gentle defenses against unpredictability. There are celebrations, too. The first day without pain, the unexpected return of laughter, even the solidarity found in commiseration. Healing here is rarely dramatic. It is made of small recoveries, new perspectives, a gradual learning to find meaning in altered dreams. It is the love of the ordinary, the slow embrace of what remains possible as you absorb these scenes. So different, yet so familiar. Let us finish this deep dive by returning to the infectious world itself. For recent research reminds us that Lyme disease's story reaches back far, binding us once again to ancient plagues and the mysterious web of nature. Envision, for a moment, a world before modern medicine, tens of thousands of years ago. The forests, meadows, and marshes brimming with unseen life, animals, insects, microscopic worlds layered upon one another. People then, as now, faced fevers, aches, and strange weaknesses without name or cause, enduring symptoms that would later be called invisible illness. Recent research has traced Borrelia, the spirochete at the heart of Lyme disease, deep into the past. Remnants of its DNA have been found in ancient ticks encased within amber, and genetic traces linger in millennial remains uncovered by archaeologists. Otzi, the Iceman, a mummified body discovered in the Alps and dated to over 5,000 years ago, was found to carry Borrelia DNA, evidence that Lyme's enigmatic presence predates cities, kingdoms, and even the first written records. This revelation reframes Lyme not as a modern threat, but as an ancient companion on humanity's journey, an illness that has always moved quietly through the background of daily life, shaping cultures in ways both subtle and profound. The cycles of unexplained fatigue, wandering joint pains, and nameless fevers echo through generations. Hidden only by the constraints of language and the limitations of medical understanding, in this light, the spiritual responses of old, demons, imbalances, curses, and rituals take on new nuance. They become not superstitions, but attempts to offer comfort and narrative, joining together stories and science, fear and empathy, the rhythm of their lives. Medicine, myth, and daily adaptation blends in a continuous, evolving tradition that persists to this day as you lie quietly tonight. Notice how this knowledge brings a gentle continuity, your own vigilance in checking for ticks after a walk, your careful attention to unexplained symptoms, even your presence here, listening and learning, are part of the same ancient rhythm. The mysteries are old, but so is the resilience. We are now prepared to transition, bringing together all that we have uncovered. Let us move into the fourth and final segment, to contrast science and myth, known fact and cherished story, and to softly ask why some truths are clung to while others are left to drift quietly away. As history softens into memory, every illness becomes more than a sequence of symptoms. It becomes a story, a symbol, even a struggle for meaning. The lines between what is known and what is believed blur gently with time. Tonight, we invite you to explore how culture, myth, and medical science have always coexisted, each helping to make sense of suffering and survival. Let us begin with the roots of explanation in ancient cultures, mapping the quiet comfort and wisdom in how our ancestors faced the unknown. Imagine the night air in ancient Babylon, thick with incense and the murmurs of countless prayers. Here, illness is never only an accident of the body. Rather, it is the visitation of a force, a demon, or an angry god's spirit. Tablets from this time, pressed with delicate cuneiform script, detail elaborate rituals and chants passed from healer to priest, mother to child. When a fever rises, a healer's job is to diagnose not only the physical symptoms, but also the spiritual cause. Was it the demon Lamashtu who crept through the window at night, bringing chills and strange headaches? Or perhaps the ghost of a wronged ancestor seeking acknowledgement? Oil poured upon water, the scattered flour on sacred altars, the patient's pulse and their dreams, all are considered, weighed, gently mapped. This blend of art and observation is not primitive, but deeply human. It offers comfort, structure, and hope when certainty is scarce. The magic is in naming the unseen, creating a story that allows suffering to be shared, grieved, and sometimes resolved. Remedies are offered both in herbs and in incantations, the world of body and spirit intertwined. Such beliefs did not vanish with the progression of time. Their echoes linger, softly, in superstitions and family customs, in the very hope for causes and cures when the answers remain elusive. Let us move gently from the ancient Tigris and Euphrates to the land of the Nile, to find a different wisdom, balance, harmony, and the breath between body and spirit. Picture dawn on the banks of the ancient Nile. Pale skies, soft wind rustling in reeds, and temple doors opening to the gentle rhythms of early prayer and purpose. Here, the Egyptian world is governed by Mat, the principle of harmony and order. Health and illness are not simply physical conditions, but states of balance or imbalance, encompassing spirit, body, diet, and even the breath. If a child falls ill, a healer priest, often called a swen, will tend them with both measured touch and incantation. Diagnosis involves the careful listening to the body's music, the pattern of breath, the rhythm of the pulse, the look in the eyes. Remedies, written on papyrus thousands of years ago, mix honey and herbs, ochre and incense. But just as importantly, rituals to appease or align unseen forces accompany the physical medicine. Illness here may be the work of a vengeful spirit, or a sign that the flow of Ka, the vital energy, has been blocked. Restoring Mat requires more than dosing a bomb. It means righting one's actions, balancing diet, and restoring peace to the mind and household. Cleansing rituals, music, and aromatic baths form part of recovery. Weaving science and sacred together like reeds in a basket, the ancient Egyptians were among the first to leave a written record of medical symptoms and treatments. Some surprisingly astute, others grounded as much in faith as in reason. Even today, the echo persists. We chase detoxification, positive energy, and the ancient idea that a peaceful environment is an ally to recovery. As you rest, consider the value of seeking balance, whether in nutrition, sleep, relationships, or breath. The wisdom of the past is not lost, only reframed. And in every small ritual, there can be solace when the path to health is uncertain. Now, As the sun climbs higher over the Nile, let us wander to the marble halls and olive groves of ancient Greece, where disease becomes the language of both gods and seasons. Imagine crisp Mediterranean air, the gentle hum of cicadas, and the distant laughter of philosophers and poets gathered in sun-dappled courtyards. In ancient Greece, knowledge and myth intermingle. Here, the cause of disease can be found in both the caprice of the gods and the shifting winds of nature. For the earliest Greeks, sickness might be a sign of divine displeasure. An unexpected fever or sudden pain was interpreted as the will of Apollo or Artemis, gods who could afflict or heal with a word. Offerings, prayers, and rituals were performed to seek forgiveness or favor. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, god of healing, became quiet sanctuaries for the ailing. Pilgrims slept in incubation rooms, dreaming of visits from the god himself, hoping for a touch of his serpent-entwined staff as the first step to recovery. Yet, as centuries passed, Greek thinkers began to look outward to the environment. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, taught that the human body was governed by humors: blood, phlegm, yellow and black bile, each shaped by diet, climate, and emotion. Imbalance caused illness, while harmony brought health. Observations of the seasons, the direction of the wind, even the alignment of stars, all shaped diagnosis. Remedies became gentler: rest, specific diets, careful moderation of lifestyle. Greek healers kept meticulous notes, tracing epidemics and mysterious fevers in city and countryside alike. They saw patterns: certain illnesses blossoming in the heat of summer, others drifting in on the wet winter air. Their wisdom persists subtly. Today, we still track cold and flu seasons and respect the body's need for rest, diet, and calm. Illness in ancient Greece thus straddled the boundary between punishment and natural consequence, myth and nascent science, reminding us, as we drift, that searching for reasons is a profoundly human instinct. The unknown is easier to bear when mapped with meaning, even if the true cause remains hidden. Rest. Letting these gentle beliefs settle in your mind before we cross continents once more. Our next stop, folk medicine and oral traditions, where ancient wisdom lingers in family stories and quiet rituals. Imagine a hush at dusk. Families gathered around a hearth, the smells of healing herbs and simmering broth rising in the air. Here, far from formal temples or marble-columned clinics, the memory of illness and the hope for healing dwell together, woven into superstition, song, and practical remedies whispered from one generation to the next. In every culture, the most trusted healers are often those closest to home. The grandmother with her poultices of garlic and honey, the uncle who knows just when to pick yarrow. From the hillsides, children learning from parents to hang sprigs of herbs above doorways and recite a blessing for the sick. These rituals may seem small, but they are grounded in deep observation, traditions honed by centuries of listening to the rhythm of seasons, the patterns of survival. Many such remedies contain real merit. Willow bark tea, used in Europe for pain, holds the same compound as modern aspirin. Ginger root eases nausea just as it did for ancient sailors. The blue ointments and syrups of country doctors often blended effective ingredients: echinacea, elderberry, or a touch of warming brandy for restless nights. In the absence of certainty, folk medicine does what myth and early science also do. It creates comfort, a sense of agency, and, crucially, the feeling of being cared for. The wisdom of these traditions persists in folk songs, lullabies, and the routines of everyday life. Cloakings, cleansings, offerings to saints and spirits. They may not always cure, but they bind family and community, easing suffering through connection and ritual. Today, echoes remain in home remedies, holistic practices, and family rituals. The line between folk wisdom and medicine blurs. We still make soups, offer tea, and find solace in the warmth of a limb gently held. In times of mysterious illness, both now and throughout history, such moments are often the softest source of healing, the reassurance that, even in uncertainty, one is not alone. Now let us gently contrast these cherished beliefs with the measured gaze of modern science. How do our present-day explanations, our hard facts, stand beside the stories and rituals we inherit? Together, we find a patchwork both comforting and complex. Picture the quiet stillness of an archive, pages yellowed and notes written in faded ink. Medical historians leaf through ancient descriptions, the fevered, trembling nights of the sweating sickness, the exhausted dance of Strasbourg, the fever citizens of Athens, the world-weary victims of Russian flu, and wonder what truly happened here. Science begins with what can be seen, tested, repeated. Teams of researchers gather clues left behind, skeletal remains, size of grave pits, patterns in parish records. Advances in genetics and microbiology allow investigators to analyze teeth, bones, even the dental pulp of centuries-old victims, searching for DNA of bacteria, viruses, or parasites. Some mysteries start to yield. The Russian flu, for instance, long thought to be influenza, is now suspected by many researchers to have been a coronavirus, an ancestor to modern strains. For the sweating sickness, attention turns to potential hantaviruses or tick-borne illnesses, but none fit perfectly. The pathogen, if it can be found at all, resists identification. The dancing plague, so difficult for scientists to categorize, remains a crossroads of neurology, psychology, toxicology, and social history. Was it ergot fungus poisoning, mass psychogenic illness? The line between body and mind blurs under scrutiny. Contemporary science excels at tracing epidemics, where physical evidence persists, but when symptoms are ambiguous, passed down only through scattered accounts, there is humility in its answers. We do not know, physicians sometimes say quietly, respecting how the past withholds its secrets. For living conditions, climate shifts, and evolving pathogens, all escape easy. Categorization. Ancient outbreaks are mapped against harvest cycles, wars, and periods of social unrest, but causation remains elusive. What is clear, time and again, is the complex interplay between environment, society, and biology. Still, the modern view insists on compassion. Today's experts are less likely to dismiss the personal suffering behind a plague's legend, even when a cure is impossible or a cause won't be found. The suffering is real. The accounts cherished for what they teach about the vulnerability and resilience of the human body and spirit. As the pages of history slowly close, science stands, not as an adversary to old stories, but as an inquisitive companion. Each new tool, from PCR and forensic anthropology to satellite mapping and climate modeling, offers hope that what was buried may yet be understood. Now, as the arc of understanding bends back toward mystery, let us examine how myths, often dismissed or diminished, sometimes carry wisdom and truth that even the best science takes generations to affirm. Imagine for a moment the voice of an elder reciting a tale in the glow of firelight, or a parent comforting a child with a story before sleep. Within these narratives, Fragments of forgotten plagues often linger, veiled in the language of demons. Curses, enchanted places, or the shifting temperament of the seasons. Dismissed by some as mere superstition, the stories nonetheless hold seeds of truth, quietly waiting to be recognized. Throughout history, myths have served as vessels for observable patterns, long before scientific method provided explanation. In medieval Europe, warnings about sleeping near swamps or venturing out at dusk echoed knowledge of malaria and other mosquito-borne diseases. Centuries before insects were identified as carriers, the bad air or malaria of Italian marshes was seen as poisonous, a half-truth that would only later evolve into the language of microbial vectors. Similarly, the folk memory of sudden batch illnesses after bad bread reflected ergotism, poisoning from fungus-infected rye, as may have contributed to the dancing plague. Old village traditions that marked times when the cows fell ill or when the fever walked the lanes often coincided with genuine outbreaks, now attributed to viruses, bacteria, or environmental toxins. Even the religious rituals, smoke, cleansing water, and isolation of the sick, would eventually find validation in practices of hygiene and quarantine. Stories that explained the sweating sickness as punishment from the gods or a curse often described patterns of contagion, susceptibility, and environmental change with remarkable acuity. They might explain why illness favored one village over the next, or surged in wet summers. Though the words were not scientific, the observations behind them were careful. Lived, repeated. In modern times, science may look back and discover that oral traditions coded genuine insights, plant remedies effective against certain ailments, the value of community isolation, or the stubborn persistence of chronic symptoms after visible recovery. What seems mystical is often a memory of something real. A myth, at its gentlest, is a lantern in the dusk, guiding behavior, sparking curiosity, and prompting protection long before explanation is available. Thus, to honor both myth and medicine is to recognize the endurance of human observation, the rhythm of their lives. A song repeated long enough becomes a map for those who follow, reminding us that stories, too, are a form of survival. Let us now reflect on the ways this dual legacy persists in our own time, how modern illness, including Lyme and mystery syndromes, inspires new myths, new rituals, and new paths between belief and science. Picture, for a moment, the glowing rectangles of modern life, a phone screen at midnight, message boards buzzing with stories, a podcast episode quietly streaming as sleep draws near. In our age, myth does not vanish, it adapts, threading through blogs, social posts, and whispered advice. Those living with Lyme disease, chronic fatigue, or elusive syndromes once called hysteria or neurasthenia, now tell their stories in digital gatherings, where the line between personal narrative and communal meaning is gently blurred. Today's myths are not always fanciful. They are often investigative, seeking explanation, solidarity, and a thread of narrative coherence. Lyme lives in the body for years, hiding in the nerves. It can outsmart the tests, some say. Or it started with a tick. It became a battle with the system. Others piece together a shared mythology of government experiments, of hidden pathogens in pristine woods, of long journeys through the shadows of disbelief. In these new stories, patients transform suffering into a proving ground, a quest for legitimacy, a badge of perseverance, a chronicle of survival. Patient memoirs, viral social media threads, and advocacy documentaries replace ancient epic and fable. There is catharsis in being seen, but also risk. As with any myth, truth and exaggeration can intermingle, amplifying fear or creating rifts between different interpretations of the same experience. Rituals arise too, echoing old customs. There are bead bracelets for spoonies, hashtags marking the anniversary of diagnosis, and online warrior challenges. Digital lanterns, posts of support, mutual aid funds, or simple thinking of you messages illuminate the darker edges of loneliness. Communities invent new forms of folk wisdom, tracking symptoms through color-coded spreadsheets, establishing detox days, discovering new herbal blends, yet the tension remains. Science seeks to clarify, sometimes advising caution when symptoms don't fit neatly into known patterns. Patients, meanwhile, tell stories to remind themselves and a wider world that the invisible is still real, that absence of proof is not proof of absence. In this mosaic of storytelling, there is both vulnerability and strength. Contemporary myth-making is less about denying science, more about filling its silences, binding people together in the face of mystery. Just as our distant ancestors once did. Now, let us gently reflect on what happens when stories and fact diverge, when belief and science cannot easily meet, and the price, social, emotional, or medical, of these unresolved mysteries grows too heavy for some to carry. Imagine, if you will, the hush of a waiting room after dusk, the steady tick of a clock, and a person caught between the facts they are given and the truth they feel inside. Across centuries, and still today, this is the cost of mystery, the chasm where belief and consensus do not meet. For patients whose symptoms elude easy classification, whose pain lingers long after standard courses of treatment, or who fail to show proof on blood work, the absence of validation can deepen their suffering. The rhythm of their lives becomes one of repetition, trying to explain, seeking new practitioners, hoping for a breakthrough, or simply being believed. Protracted uncertainty can erode not only the mind, but the fabric of families and friendships, doubt trickling into conversations until even compassion is worn thin. Social costs accumulate, too. Unsolved illness often becomes stigmatized, dismissed, as all in the mind or attributed to personal weakness. Those who persist in seeking answers may be labeled difficult, their accounts minimized with a polite nod or an averted gaze. For every community that rallies in support, another may quietly withdraw, leaving the individual in self-doubt and isolation. Medicine, too, pays a price. Caregivers and doctors may feel helpless or frustrated in the face of symptoms that fail to resolve. Their commitment to clarity becomes a source of guilt when certainty is impossible. Trust between practitioner and patient, so essential for healing, wilts beneath the pressure of repeated uncertainty, and on a societal level, unresolved mysteries leave their traces in public policy, insurance protocols, and research funding. When science cannot say yes or no, doors to support may close gently but firmly, while those most in need are left waiting on the threshold. Yet even this divide holds a quiet lesson. The fragility of certainty, the rarity of simple answers, rehumanizes all who listen. It shows, as the old stories so often remind us, that being wrong, uncertain, or left behind is not a personal fault, but a companion to every age and every epoch of discovery. In these moments, the act of remembering, the gentle retelling of forgotten plagues, the honoring of those who suffered unseen, becomes its own kind of salve against the price of silence and doubt. Now, as we near the close of this segment, let us return gently to the question, why do we forget these mysteries, and what do we lose when we do? What is the value, not just of knowledge, but of remembrance itself? Imagine a family dinner decades after the fearful hush of a plague, the stories of illness now softened by distance or reimagined as little more than anecdotes. This is how memory fades, quietly, almost mercifully, as life resumes its familiar patterns. The urgency of survival eclipses the shadow of suffering, and the world, eager to believe the threat has passed, prefers to remember endurance rather than the mystery itself. There are reasons for this forgetting. The mind, seeking comfort, often turns away from the distressing or unsolvable. Communities, looking to rebuild after loss, resist reopening wounds, choosing instead to cherish triumph, renewal, and the constancy of daily chores. The rhythm of their lives finds solace in returning to routine. Closing the chapter on what cannot be fully understood, history too conspires in silence. Curricula condense centuries into neat lines, omitting what cannot be neatly explained. Textbooks lionize conquerors, inventions, and revolutions, leaving only side notes for the strange fevers and shadowy deaths that slipped through the cracks. What remains are scraps, journal entries, folk songs, the stray recollection of an elder, each susceptible to further erosion by time. But there is a cost to this gentle forgetting. When illness returns, whether in new guise or hidden persistence, society is slow to recognize it, slow to believe sufferers, slow to marshal the resources of science and compassion alike. The cycle of disbelief recommences, and those affected must fight anew for acknowledgement, for research, for healing. Families may lose the wisdom of old remedies or the habits that once protected them. Doctors may start from first principles, repeating mistakes or missing warning signs. And patients, especially, may feel lonelier, believing themselves uniquely cursed, when in truth they echo the millions who suffered quietly before them. Yet, in the quiet act of remembering, by listening, reading, and sharing even in the hush of night, we break this cycle. To remember is to honor endurance, to offer empathy, and to build a foundation for gentler futures. When certainty once again recedes, as you rest, consider the subtle beauty in carrying even a few of these stories forward. Let us now turn, softly, to contemplate why remembrance matters, not just for the sick, but for us all, the healing, the curious, and those who are simply quietly awake. Imagine yourself, in these final moments before sleep, as part of a tapestry woven from millions of silent threads. Each story you have heard tonight, of plagues unnamed, of illnesses misunderstood, of voices lost and found again, forms a delicate pattern stretching from ancient hearths to your gently lit room. There is solace and strength in remembrance. By not averting our eyes from mystery, we expand the circle of compassion, reminding ourselves that suffering, especially the invisible kind, is never unique, never evidence of weakness, but a shared chapter in humanity's story. This act of witnessing, even in the solitude of headphones or the stillness of night, creates continuity between the past and present. The rhythm of their lives becomes our own, a reassuring undercurrent that connects us across centuries. For the living, remembrance encourages humility. Not every question will be answered. Not every pain will yield to explanation. But in recalling the uncertainty once endured by others, we become patient with the questions in our own lives. gentler toward loved ones navigating their shadowed days, and more steadfast in speaking up for those whose illnesses are still misunderstood. There is wisdom, too, in the rituals of comfort and story, whether practiced by ancient healers, blessing a fevered child, or by modern patients, building virtual communities of care. When certainty fails, story and connection remain. They fill the silence and, like lullabies, guide us gently toward rest. For the sleepless, the quietly anxious, the watchers at bedsides, the thinkers and the dreamers, remembrance is a gentle companion. Unsolved mysteries, softly held, need not bring only fear. They bring the chance for empathy, solidarity, and the quiet hope that understanding still lies ahead. In time, new answers may emerge, but tonight it is enough to be present, aware, and kind. So as sleep begins to draw close, remember, in the long history of forgotten plagues and invisible illnesses, you are not alone. Your story, whether of health or struggle, joins an ancient river, always flowing, always remembered by someone, somewhere. Let us gently close our eyes, release the need for certainty, and rest in the warmth of all that connects us, in mystery, in memory, and in hope. As the world beyond your walls grows quiet, and the pace of your thoughts slows, allow yourself to linger in this moment, neither fully awake nor quite asleep, but suspended in the gentlest pause between. You have traveled through centuries in a single night, listening to the whispered legacy of forgotten plagues and invisible struggles. You have traced paths, lit by hope and shadowed by uncertainty, across ancient empires and modern towns, through the lives of healers, patients, and unseen caregivers. Each story, fragile and persistent, was a bridge connecting you to the countless seekers who came before, watchers at bedside, mothers boiling herbs, lovers whispering comfort, and the quiet strength of scientists, advocates, and survivors through the rhythm of history, its repetitions and revelations. You have found a quieter truth, that neither science nor myth alone explains all, and that the greatest solace often comes simply from being believed, remembered, and gently understood. In the hush between questions and answers, you have found company. Tonight, if your body aches, know you walk a well-worn path, marked by invisible hands, and that this too connects you to others. If your mind is restless, let these stories be a lullaby. The pulse of their endurance beats within you, softly, reassuringly, a pattern as old as the first gesture of comfort offered across firelight. You do not have to solve every mystery before sleep. You do not have to contend with invisibility alone. The forgotten are remembered, the misunderstood are heard, and the weary are, for this moment, gently sustained. Opened your heart to uncomplicated rest. The weight of the world can be set aside until morning. Let your breath be slow and easy, your body warm and safe. Know that in the story of humanity, your chapter is valued, tender, merged with countless other lives, always belonging. And as you drift toward the border of dreams, trust that your story, like those of the long ago and far away, is worthy of remembrance, kindness, and hope. Good night.